Koven, you had talked earlier about your conversations with museum directors, and Beth's talking about the fact that we managed to adapt to this drastic shift so radically, so quickly. Makes me wonder, in your conversations with executive leaders, where everybody pretty much feels like they're behind the 8 ball, they're behind the times, they recognize it, they feel bad about it. Like, what are the things that you are seeing affecting decision-making at the executive levels in the field? Like, how are museum leaders thinking differently about the future, and particularly this strange moment we're in now, where everybody has a realization of digital audiences and digital engagement much more viscerally than they did even a year ago. But we're at that point where institutions are reopening. When everybody was closed, it was very easy to do the quote unquote pivot to digital because that was the only game in town for a while. But now these new audiences have been explored by lots of different organizations, from the very tiny to the very large. Everybody knows that there are people out there, as Elizabeth pointed out. In many ways, they're also not the physical audience. They are a separate audience segment who would not come even if the building were open. But now decisions are having to be made in terms of staffing and budgets, and where is the emphasis going to go in the future? What are you seeing in terms of how leaders are grappling with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we are seeing is a transition from, we used to say the digital pivot, which I never quite believed in, because in most institutions that would imply you stopped doing one thing and started doing another thing. For most institutions, it was, well, we just added a whole new class of things on top of what we were already doing, but we kept doing those old things too. And so now I don't hear pivot talked about very much. Everyone who talks about hybrid, that we are going to be a hybrid organization moving forward, which I think is actually a more sort of accurate assessment of what actually occurred when the pandemic began. And I think, I think some of that is, as you alluded to, Ed, with the, the sort of viscerality of it, that it's like, I mean, museum directors can see the numbers. They can see, I mean, I remember speaking to a VP at a, rather prominent aquarium who basically said, during the summer of 2020, our summer programs turned a profit for the first time ever. It's the first time that it ever occurred, because it was the first time that they could actually let in the kinds of numbers that would make, the development and support for those programs, realize an actual return on the investment. So, I think like the numbers are there, and certainly there, I think of organizations like the Gantt Center in Charlotte, who we have worked with, where they were just seeing tremendous visitation for their online programs, almost all of which was from outside of Charlotte, and a lot of visitors from outside the country altogether. And they saw it was like, oh, well, we clearly have a voice here that we, always with that sort of local focus, had not necessarily realized we had. And so, I do think, I mean, it's easy to be cynical, especially having done technology for so long in museums, and say, okay, well, finally everyone is coming around to what we've been saying for so long. But I do think we are at a real moment where it's like, I think a lot of institutions are starting to explore that model, and in a very sort of sincere way, not just like, let's get more numbers, but like, oh, hey, this might be a different way for us to be a museum, a more sort of inclusive and responsive way to be a museum. And I think it's a really, I mean, it's an interesting moment. I mean, it's tinged with all kinds of sadness given what we've lost, but it is a moment.